Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss how the cost of living crisis is starting to boil over into the potential for wide-ranging industrial action, starting with the rail strikes taking place this week, and how Boris Johnson is aiming to use this unrest to his advantage. Something that should not be possible for the government and is only possible for this government because it's a Conservative government backed by disingenuous media. But this is turning into a key political battleground for this summer. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, we have a massive rail strike underway this week. Technically 3 days of strike action, but on alternating days to basically wipe out a week. In isolation, this is about 3 grievances, really. The first is that pay has been frozen, which is not acceptable at any time in my books. If your pay does not go up in line with inflation, you have received a pay cut. And I've said a few times, I can understand a small or struggling business that's not always able to afford to increase their prices in order to give their workers inflation-linked pay at times of high inflation, as now. But there are plenty of businesses where they have no such excuse. If the company's making large profits, you can afford to pay your staff. And the government and Tory media are trying to make this out as train drivers wanting more money, because train drivers don't get paid too badly. But even train drivers should not expect a real terms pay cut. But the majority of the RMT union members who are striking are not train drivers at all. They are the low-paid cleaners and porters, the very people on the lowest incomes who cannot make ends meet, the people the government were disingenuously clapping for a couple of years ago. They don't need clapping, they need some money. To be getting a real terms pay cut is simply not feasible. As I've said to a number of Tories who've tried to attack this strike, either work to help them get the fair pay rise they need or work to lower their cost of living. Make it meet. Make their pay able to afford the cost of living. Poverty is not an option. Working people, for goodness sake. The second and third grievances really are linked. It's the potential for forced redundancies. There are pressures on our rail right now. Of course there are. More people are sensibly working from home, despite the government pretending that COVID is endemic. It is not. So in years to come, with a sensible government and historians looking back on this period, when the documentaries start coming out, do you know what? We're not going to believe what we allowed to happen. But the point is there are fewer rail customers. So of course a private business looks to cut. If it's not getting as much money, it looks to cut costs. And the straightforward thing is to try and lose staff. But here's the thing. Just because there are fewer travellers on the trains doesn't mean there are lower staffing needs. With some businesses, that might be the case, not here. Trying to get rid of staff for forced redundancies means a couple of things. First, you're depriving some people of their incomes completely, through no fault of theirs. Second, that you're attempting to run a skeleton crew to run the same service. Now, that's arguably the more serious thing. If a private bit, and of course it shouldn't be privately run, but it is. But if a private business suddenly loses a load of custom and it needs to lose some staff as a result of it, you sort of can't argue too strongly about that. You want to make sure that those workers, ideally it's through natural wastage and voluntary redundancies, not forced redundancies. But in this particular case, what you're basically doing is trying to maintain the same services with fewer staff. That means running a skeleton crew to provide the same service with the excuse you don't have as many customers, but you still need as many staff, but you'll have fewer staff. That compromises the safety of those who remain on staff, as well as the actual customers. It also generally means you're asking those who remain to have to work harder to pick up the slack because you've got rid of their colleagues. Oh, you do their work now. And they're getting that real terms pay cut into the bargain. As far as I'm concerned, these are exactly the conditions which justify industrial action. But there isn't just industrial action and not industrial action. In terms of the specific type of action here, I am wary. I don't consider the RMT to be the most strategic union. I do worry that they may be playing this wrong by going straight in with a full week of disruption rather than having started off with something minor and escalating as it doesn't. I mean, that's usually the best, isn't it? It's like, okay, you're not coming to an accord with us. We're going to do this thing. Then we're going to do this next thing. And you ramp it up. When you're going hard from the start, where do you go from there? But we will see. In a week's time, we'll know if they played their hand well or badly because we'll see how it impacts on the public opinion. In 2 weeks, we'll see if they've got a long-term game plan because they may well need one. Because in the meantime, Boris Johnson is loving this. Never mind any hopes of the government trying to get around the table. Normally, a normal government, a functioning government, would wish to avoid a strike like this and would get involved in talks and try and avoid it. These haven't. Boris Johnson has egged this on. You know, Starmer made the point last week in PMQs, and he's right. There are threats of strikes from other professions as well, teachers, doctors, and so on, for example. This could turn into something akin to a general strike, though I don't think it will actually be a general strike because I see no sign of different unions coordinating as such. But Johnson is loving it. It means he's got another excuse for the next round of economic bad news. He's blamed our current contraction with the economy on the fact he dealt with COVID too. Oh, we were too marvellous at dealing with COVID. That's why our economy's knackered. As if you'd believe that. He'll blame the news of actual recession on the striking workers as well as Labour. And to illustrate this point, consider that Boris Johnson is entirely focused on the next election. This is how it works. He doesn't care about the bits of governing. Because what you're supposed to do as a party, it's like you campaign, win the election, then you govern. Then you get your campaign for the next election and so on. Boris Johnson missed out the governing bit. He's only concerned with the elections, the campaigning. He wants power for the sake of power. And his current position is also very much tied to his ability to win that next election as well. So to understand how he will react to action like this, consider who he needs to target. Johnson doesn't need to appeal to a large number of voters. He can carry on pissing off the public at large. And it will eat into the majorities of a lot of safe Tory seats at the next election, but he won't lose those seats. In first past the post, he won't lose it. He couldn't afford to do this if we had proportional representation. First past the post, you can. Because in the crucible of a general election where opposition parties have to target their very limited resources, he knows that the vast majority of seats will be fine, even with him in charge. It's about those swing voters in those key target constituencies. So imagine the hypothetical voter that Boris Johnson needs to attract. They're worried about the ever-rising cost of living. Everything keeps going up. Energy, fuel, food. Rent and mortgage rates are going up, you know. All things you can't do without. And if you try and cut back at all, you're lowering your standard of living. These people work hard. They don't see why they should suffer a lowering of living standards. The Tories keep saying we want to make pay work. But now they're saying you shouldn't ask for a pay rise and you actually should accept pay cuts to help the economy. Do your bit, you know, do your bit. I already can't afford the bills. No, never mind. Just go without food for a few more days. And let's be honest, this hypothetical voter isn't going to vote Tory at the next election, are they? They can't be that daft. So they're going to switch their vote. Extrapolated across all the target seats, this means the Tories losing power. This trajectory results in Boris Johnson being a private citizen this Christmas because Tory MPs are not going to let him get to the next election like this. So faced with this situation, Boris Johnson has got two options, both of which are sort of covered by these strikes, but one more than the other. The first option is to turn the attention away from the personal plight of this hypothetical voter. Focus their attention on some terrible things that threaten them that only Boris Johnson will protect them from. Say, oh, you're struggling to pay the bills. That's nothing compared with what would happen if I weren't in charge. You know, immigrants and refugees are a classic, hence the Rwanda refugee scheme. The Home Office has also threatened to deport 1,000 foreign GPs. So at a time of severe shortages of doctors, with the government failing to provide more GPs, because they promised to, now they're not, where it's harder to attract doctors from overseas now. In fact, on a related note, the government have now had to admit that they're not going to meet their target for recruiting nurses either. So, but, you know, shortage of doctors, the government aren't building the supplies up as they said, an ever-increasing healthcare burden caused by incompetent COVID handling. Our government's plan is to get rid of doctors we already have. But these culture wars are all part of making people think that the real enemy is not the Conservatives but something else. And because this enemy is fictitious, and the enemy is always either foreigners or Labour, but because this enemy is fictitious, no other political party has policies to deal with it. So the Tories present themselves as the only ones who take it seriously. And that sort of works. It worked in 2019. It's worked before. The problem is right now this voter is struggling. They care less about the culture war issues when they can't pay the bills. It's not that they don't care about them at all. The same people will still... But right now they care about their plight. So this tactic doesn't work as well unless you can improve the economy to the point where they're able to cope again. But this is not going to happen. So what's your solution? You have to turn the power up on it. And as this relates to the strikes, I worry about a return to the nastiness of the miners' strikes in my childhood, when a ruthless government, desperate for their own culture war, ran up against a strategically incompetent union leadership. The results were catastrophic. And Johnson is worse than Thatcher. He also has far more authoritarian legislation under his belt, should it turn to that. You know, the new policing bill. But that's one option. That may turn some, he'll hope. The second option for Johnson is to make Labour sound like a worse prospect than the Conservatives. Because bear in mind, Boris Johnson did not fight the last election on a proud record of Tories, like saying, oh, look how much better off you are under the Tories. Because that wasn't happening. He had to admit, you're worse off. He fought it on the basis that as crap as things are, they'd be even worse under Labour. He will intend to pull the same trick again. Not as easy with a Labour leader who is not exactly loved, but is not offensive to people. They've no reason to mistrust Starmer as they do Johnson. Even attempts to smear him have so far backfired. Beergate won Starmer more support after promising to resign if fined, because it showed character in stark contrast to Johnson. You know, Boris Johnson, whose ethics advisors keep resigning because of the lack of ethics in government. But the Tories have got a few hands to play still. They're billing these strikes as Labour's fault. It's the party that haven't been in government for 12 years, their fault. Why? Because Labour won't condemn them. That's why. Apparently that's it. And Johnson tried this trick before during the pandemic, that the problems weren't down to his inaction in government, but the fact that Labour wouldn't support him, even though they sort of did. You know, they've been laying out good and thick. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, who refused to get involved in talks, remember, they want these strikes. That's why they haven't got themselves involved in talks. He tried to claim that Starmer's been encouraging the unions to strike. On the other hand, it's the other way around. There's no basis for this claim, goes without saying. The claim went completely unchallenged by the BBC interviewer. I saw one correspondent seeming to think that Shapps was basing it on an assertion in the Daily Mail that was reporting that Starmer refuses to agree to tighter laws on strike action. Oh, can you imagine that? A leader of the Labour Party doesn't want to make strikes illegal. Funny that, isn't it? But that is not unlike saying that a shopkeeper is trying to give their locals diabetes because they won't ban cakes from their shop. But this is the way Johnson will play this. In fact, the government are encouraging bosses to resist pay increases. And this isn't wild speculation, it's reported in the media quite openly. The government are claiming that giving workers a pay rise is going to make inflation worse. They're actively trying to tell businesses not to pay people enough to meet the cost of living crisis. They're even arguing that some workers should take pay cuts. The Prime Minister has said that. You know, they're trying to use this to their advantage. Johnson will absolutely welcome a summer of strike action. It's something he can unite Tory MPs over because they don't like it. It's a battle he can have with Labour on a side issue because obviously Labour are going to be on the side of the workers who need the pay rise. It's a distraction from his own incompetence. Just as with COVID, although he has all the levers necessary to make the situation much better, he will claim that it's outside of his control and the public will believe him. It's the perfect political battle for him. He gets to claim he's powerless to stop it, but only he can stop it because he's got a plan, you know, this thing for the future. All this plan requires is taking away more of our rights. That's it. And it all goes away. You know, this is proper Stockholm syndrome, isn't it? You know, this is a theme I feel we'll be picking up again because this is how he's operating now. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.